Okay, number one, we're looking at the distance between 2 points, which if you remember the distance formula is basically just the distance between the two x's squared plus the distance between the two y's squared. So that's going to end up being, once we plug in this case it might be, we'll have -1 minus 3 squared plus 4 minus 1 squared. So as I start to simplify this, I'm going to get -4 squared plus 3 squared, which just turns out to be the square root of 16 plus 9, or, as you can see, 25. And finally, we just know that the distance is 5. And notice it's not plus or minus 5 because we're looking for a distance, so it's got to be positive. Now we're looking for number 2, the endpoints of the diameter of a circle. So if we look at any circle, well, that was a decent circle, not bad. And let's draw that diameter in. If these are the endpoints here and here of that diameter, then the very middle point is the center. So we know that in order to find a midpoint, we need to take the average of the x's and then the average of the y's. So once we plug these in, you're going to get 2 plus 1 over 2, and then 5 plus a -3 over 2. And that just ends up being 3 over 2 and then 2 over 2, which is basically 1. And that would get you the coordinates, which is what you're looking for, an x and y coordinate pair. Okay, so what's the focus of this graph? Well, you don't have any information about this graph, like no equation or anything. But if you quickly graph each one of these, here's point A, here's point B, here's point C, and here's point D, it becomes obvious the only one that can be the focus is C, because the focus has to be inside the parabola. So we actually don't even need the equation. For number 4, what's the standard form of a parabola with directrix at x is -2 and vertex at 0, 0? Well, let's just do a quick and dirty sketch of what we're looking at. So here is x is -2. Okay, that's the directrix. And here is the vertex, which means the focus, if this here is 2 units, the focus also has to be another 2 units away here. So there's the focus. And then my graph is going to look something like this. Well, if I know that, now I went and covered up the answers, because if you wanted to find the actual equation, you'd have to recognize that this is a horizontal parabola with a vertex at the center, which means we're looking at y squared is 4px. Now we have to find p. Now remember, the value of p has directionality to it, so if this value is 2 in the positive direction, it means I'm using +2 for p. Now you could quickly figure it out, that's y squared is 8x, which here is c. But remember, since we're running multiple choice, what that means is that you could just recognize that this is a horizontal parabola, which does away with a and d, and it's a parabola opening in the positive direction, which also gets rid of b, because since b was negative, it would have had it opening up to the left. Okay, number 5. Again, let's get a sketch out of this. And I've got an ellipse with a vertex at 0, -4. Let's say that's about here. Here's the vertex, and so I've got another one up top. And a co-vertex at 2, 0. So I'll put co-vertex here and here. Well, just by virtue of that equation of an ellipse, I know that since the vertex goes in the y direction 4 units, then what I originally started out with is y squared over, well, whatever number would, when I take the square root of it, would get me 4. So when I square 4, I get 16. That's what goes underneath y. And if you look, the only one that we have that's like that is c again. Now we could have also done away with a, because that's for a hyperbola, and we're not looking for a hyperbola here. Okay? If you wanted to complete this, then you could just recognize that this value is 2 in the x direction, so when I square that, it means I started out here with 4, because remember, again, the way that I get these values is I take the square root of each denominator, and it tells me how far out to move from the center. Okay, I'll just quickly show you here. This is a value of 7 and 6. I've got an equation, or I've got an ellipse and I want the equation. Well, if this value from here to here is 6 units in the x direction, it means underneath x I'm looking for 36. Well, we know it can't be C because that's a hyperbola because of the minus sign. So it has to be A. We also know that if this value is 7, that it means underneath y squared I need 49. And again, the reason that is because the numbers that tell me which direction to go and how far are the denominators by taking the square root of each. Number 7, let's find the foci of this ellipse. Well, in order to find the foci, we need to be in standard form. And in order to get standard form, I'm going to have to divide by 48. So I've got x squared over 16 plus y squared over 12 is equal to 1. All right, well, if I've got that, then now that I've got my ellipse in standard form, I can use this formula. C squared is a squared minus b squared. So when I substitute in, I've got c squared is 16 minus 12. So c squared is 4. And when I take the square root of each, I'll just be looking for c is equal to a value of 2. Now that means that the actual coordinate pair would be something maybe a bit different. If you were to graph this, you notice that the largest axis, I'll pick a different color, the largest axis is in that x direction. That's the major axis here. So that means I'd go 2 units in that x direction. Here's a focus, and here's a focus. Okay, so those values are negative 2, 0, and then 2, 0. All right, number 8. I need an equation of a hyperbola with those foci and those vertices. So let's go ahead and graph. And let's see, I'll put F. I've got foci about right up here and here. And then I've got vertices about right here and here. This is just a sketch. And when I graph that, I'm looking at something like this hyperbola. So I notice that it opens in the vertical direction, so I'm looking for a hyperbola that starts with y. So automatically A and D are out. And since the distance to the vertex is 3 units, remember when I square that I get 9, so the number underneath y squared should be 9, so that's B. And if you still didn't notice that from there, you could go back to the equation of a focus, a squared plus b squared. Or c squared, in this case, is 7, so 7 squared is 3 squared plus b squared. So I've got 49 is 9 plus b squared. So that means that b squared must be equal to 40. It's got to be. Number 9, what are the asymptotes of this hyperbola? Well, let's add 64 to both sides. We'll get y squared minus 16x squared is 64. And then the next thing I'll do is divide by 64 to get it in standard form. And I've got y squared over 64 minus x squared over 4. Once I reduce 16 into 64, gives me 1. And remember, the way that I find that asymptote slope is to take the square root of the y denominator, or y squared denominator, over the square root of the x squared denominator. So I've got 8 over 2, which is 4. So that is the slope of my asymptotes. Number 10, we're not going to cover that one. 11, what's the radius of the circle here? Well, remember, a circle can't have coefficients, so we'll get rid of these by dividing by 3, and I've got x squared plus y squared is equal to 9. And then you notice that if I just take the square root of r squared, which in this case is 9, it gives me a radius of 3. Number 12, I need the equation of ellipse with a vertex at 3 and negative 3. So I'll really quick do vertex here, and then foci here and here. And of course we notice that if this distance is 3, it means that to start out I had a 9, right? 3 squared is 9, underneath x because it's opening up in this x direction. So the only one that it could be is, it looks like we're looking for b itself. And we can automatically get rid of a because it's not a hyperbola. We're going to skip 13. Okay, 14. What are the co-vertices here of this ellipse? Well, first of all, let's get the ellipse in standard form. So we've got x squared over 12 plus y squared over 4 is equal to 1. Now remember, the co-vertices are the shortest axis, which in this case is here. So if I take the square root of 4, it gets me 2. And if I go 2 units in the y direction, it's got to be d.